Hi, I'm Jamie Adelson-Goldstein, and I'd like to welcome you to Picture This, promoting adult English language learners' access to online language teaching, sponsored by Oxford University Press. During our time together, we'll consider the access issues that our learners have and the global skills they need to demonstrate when they work around these issues. We'll also look at ways to frame our transition from face-to-face to online environments using the tools, routines, and tasks we know are effective. And finally, albeit briefly, we'll think about how to continue promoting learner voice and choice in our instruction, because this is an essential element of rigorous and engaging 21st century adult English language teaching, and we don't want to lose that just because of moving our environment. So what access issues do our learners face, and which can we address realistically? What role do global skills play in improving adult English learners' access to online instruction? This is a list of access issues that I brainstormed, and I'm sure you could add to it. Obviously, equipment could be a barrier to access. We don't know if our learner has older equipment or if we're expecting them to be on a desktop and all they have available is a smartphone. We need to know all that information. We also don't know the reliability of their Wi-Fi or if it even exists. Their digital skills may vary. In some cases, their skills will be stronger than their teachers, but there still are many, many learners who, for lack of experience, don't really even know how to work their own devices beyond the most rudimentary level. So we really need some support with that, or that becomes a huge issue. The complexity, not only of the platform that we're supplying for the learner to work on, but the complexity of the entire situation they're facing in their daily lives, and the complexity of the content that they'll be looking at when they're working online, are all issues that can be barriers to access. The last three are really deep emotional issues that learners and teachers alike may be having right now. Certainly a loss of sense of community, something we can get back, but if we've been in a face-to-face environment and we suddenly are no longer there, we and our learners are suffering from that sense of loss. A lack of confidence, certainly we might have that in terms of broaching instruction in this environment, but our learners may have had a lack of confidence in their language skills, and that was bolstered by, or supported anyway, when their classmates told them, no, you're doing great, keep going. When those classmates aren't there to do that, then the English language lack of confidence issue might arise again, not to mention the lack of confidence in using technology. So it's kind of a double whammy. And those two things together can really combine to create a fixed mindset on the part of the learner, meaning that once the learner fails at doing something, it could be a tech fail that has nothing to do at all with the learner's skills, but once that happens, the learner might say, oh, that's it, I've reached the pinnacle of my ability here, and I need to stop. And we really don't want that to happen. So how can we help our learners and address some of these issues? Well, first of all, we really have to know what kind of equipment the learners are working with. We need to know whether the whole class has a smartphone, and if they do, then we can make use of that, we know. If learners primarily have tools that their children are using, then we know that we're going to have to deal with the schedule for when the children need to be on the computers. There's a lot that we need to know, and we need to do an assessment. What a surprise. In terms of Wi-Fi, I've linked this in the slide to Everyone On, which is a website that helps people find inexpensive wireless connections. But you need to know that this is something that many Wi-Fi providers will do if they're contacted. So this would be something that you would want to, if you're not in the US, you'd want to explore. Digital skills, we don't have the time to handhold each student through the computer basics. We certainly can provide background. The Oxford Picture Dictionary has some wonderful pages on the on the different tools that we use when we're working on the internet and when we're working in a classroom with online access. They have a lot of information about the jobs related to computers, but students really need to spend time getting to know their device and getting to acquire the skills they need to make the best use of that device. And so I've linked here to North Star, which is a self-assessment tool and would help learners at the, I'd say, high beginning and above, assess what they know and what they need to know. You can also find a myriad of tools and videos online, but of course a learner has to know how to get there. So you might want to identify what the major issues are for your learners and then send them links through texts to the videos. It's important that we give screenshots, that we give short video directions, try and do one aspect of a task at a time. Learners probably won't do nearly as well if we're just giving them the information orally. Think about your last phone call with tech support and how much more meaningful it is when someone shows you what to do, or you at least have some visual to guide you through a process. In terms of, so that's scaffolding that we have to do there. In terms of the loss of community and the lack of confidence and the fixed mindset, probably the best way to reverse that process is to keep the connections really strong. Engage learners with each other, engage with your learners, and remember that that voice and choice element I mentioned earlier is a wonderful way for helping people develop their sense of community even when they are working remotely. And those of you that have been part of a professional learning community online or a community of practice know when an incredible bond can be created. It's really quite amazing. You wouldn't think that would necessarily be the case, but people really do get to know each other online. That may not be the case as much for our lowest level learners because part of the way that we communicate and become bonded is through text. Speaking of which, I can use email, text, and utility features on my learners' phones to help get them assignments, as you see on the left, to answer questions about assignments, as you see in the middle, and to have some wonderful opportunities to hear my learners' voices and their thoughts during this very challenging time. Voice memos are a wonderful tool. They're on most phones. Even if you don't have the voice memo app that's native to your phone, the text messaging usually will allow you to record a message. And what I especially like about the voice memos, though, is that as you can see on the far right-hand side, the access to sharing the recording, copying the recording, duplicating it is all very transparent. And once we go over the process with the learners, they would be able to start doing this regularly. And it doesn't have to be a long recording. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. What we're doing right now is a very unnatural way to listen. Of course, you could also work with the apps that your learners already have on their phones that they're using regularly. So the maps, the weather, Google Drive, a Microsoft. If you find out in the needs assessment which apps your learners already have on their phone, and this is different from the ones that are native to the phone, but these are ones that they would have put on their phone, then you can have them do a lot of data collection just from this app, temperatures, distances. You can have them plan the best route for a series of deliveries. That's very relevant right now. And you can have them solve problems. So there's a tie-up on the freeway. What is another way to get from A to B? And in talking about solving problems, we really move very nicely into the global skills. Before we get deeply into them, these are some of the global skills that are named in the white paper you see on the side that was put out by Oxford University Press, and there will be a link to that paper when we finish. But I'd like you to think, which of these global skills have you called on in the last 48 hours? And you can think of global skills as essential skills or 21st century skills. I'm going to bet that you had all of them clicked. They all play a role in navigating 21st century adult life, and right now in particular. But let's think for a moment about the ones that my learners are going to need most to start navigating this new environment with me. Right away, I can highlight the last two. They are going to need a tolerance for ambiguity, and they are going to need a willingness to learn. In fact, a tolerance for ambiguity is probably the key skill for the 21st century, and certainly for this time in our lives. But a willingness to learn, an open mind, a growth mindset, an acknowledgement that tech is going to fail, things are going to go wrong, we're going to find workarounds, and that fits right into the problem-solving skill. And we know that this is a highly rated skill by employers. Of course, if, for example, some of us aren't used to working at home, learners may not be used to having to study in the same room as several children, because the kids are at school when they're studying. Well, that's going to require some self-awareness and some self-management. Obviously, all of these skills can come into play, but what we need to remember is that while our learners may very well possess these skills, they may not have the language to express and demonstrate them. So we need to be very direct in giving the language frames that show a learner is problem solving. I think the best solution for this would be because. So take a moment. Every time you see a pretty nature picture, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and reflect on the questions you see below the picture. It's a good time for you to stop listening to my voice. When I was considering how best to frame a successful transition from face-to-face to online learning, I bumped into the SAMR acronym in my notes, and I thought, well, this is interesting. Dr. Ruben Puentedura formulated this and made it popular, and there is a link to a wonderful video that someone did about the stages. But this is really, he was talking about it in terms of integrating technology into our instruction. We are in technology now, so it's not a matter of how we're integrating it, although there's a bit of the how, but we're there. So now it's really a matter of how are we going to make sure that we have the same level of success in communicating ideas to our learners and helping our learners acquire the language. What is it that we can do in this setting that's going to be successful for all involved? Now, when Puentedura is talking about the substitution level, he was putting it down to some degree, saying, well, if you can, obviously it was a first step. If you are going to have a learner download a paper from the internet or download a worksheet, and then fill it out, that's very similar to handing out the paper in the classroom. What the substitution work that we're doing is actually incredibly valuable, because what the substitution does in our case is it adds a layer of comfort for the learner and the teacher. So anything that we can do in the online learning environment that we could do in the face-to-face classroom is going to serve us well, and it's going to serve our learners well. And that's not to say that we don't want to enhance through augmentation or modify to give the learners even more say, and to finally redefine so that the task is 100% in the student's hands. But initially, having the substitution is great. Let's look at an example of substituting through redefinition. Starting with a question, remember, for adult learning, we want questions and concepts and contexts that are relevant. So hopefully this question will be something that is of interest to you. Is your daily routine the same as it was on February 1st, 2020? And then what's the same, what's different, what's good, bad, or interesting about the differences? On the online environment, I can substitute the brainstorm that I would do on my whiteboard on an online whiteboard. So this is an example from Zoom. When I go to share screen, I'm given some choices and I go to the whiteboard and then I click and there's my brainstorm. I've already set this up ahead of time. Notice that the students have told me what to write in this, but it's also possible, depending on the level of your students, that the students can write on the whiteboard as well. It's typing, essentially. And then there are some annotation tools, the little heart, the question mark, the X. Those I could use as stamps. You, I think, can see them on the annotation tool up there. The stamps would allow me to check with the class to see which of these things are good differences and which of these things are not so good and which are just plain interesting. And of course, people will have different answers, and it engages learners in a lot of interesting conversation. I can do another form of substitution by now going to the Oxford Picture Dictionary and using the ebook and using the daily routines that are there to help learners complete this brainstorm. So if I needed to give them additional language, or they wanted additional language, they could check their books at home, or they could also look. I could pull up the ebook and we could work with that. Sorry. The pictures that you see here are the spread from the daily routines topic in the picture dictionary. And I can use annotation tools in my platform as I'm presenting this. In Zoom, there would be a green line around this to show that I was sharing it. In the ebook, you just pull up the pages. In other formats, you would need to put the PDF up to share. But something I'd like to show you is that in the online teacher resource center, which I'm going to now show you, when I browse by topic, I'm looking at the different units in the picture dictionary, and from that unit I would find daily routines. I happen to know that's there, but you could just search for it. And in daily routines, I see a collection of materials that I can use. There are lesson plans, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's just the audio that names the words. There's also listening, multi-level listening, multi-level grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation. There are a lot of tools that I can pull on to use in my online platform. But what I would like to point out is the images section. So this is part of the Teacher Resource Center that I think gives the most bang for the buck, because it's every picture in the picture dictionary. So when I click on this, it will download to my computer, and I let it know that I'm okay with that. And it downloads here, but I want to share with you that I have created an online teaching materials folder, and when I open it, I save everything to that. And here's my OPD images. And when I open this, and I can show it to you this way, I can see all the images from the page, and I can pick and choose which images I'd like to use with the learners. So this is an example of something being augmented for the teacher, because instead of having to use the book and all of these pictures, I'm able to pick and choose which pictures I want to use. By the same token, I can give my students a set of these pictures in a breakout room, and they can pick and choose which of the routines are essential, which of the routines wouldn't be done in a pandemic. This is something that I think about when I'm planning my lesson. I like to think about what are the features of the tools I'm using, and how are they going to relate to the lesson that I already teach. So in this case, and there you see the green line around the dictionary page, I'm sharing this page, and I'm going to ask questions about the page, and I'm going to, they could be yes, no questions, they could be inference questions. Do you think, what is the difference between get up and wake up? that's an interesting situation with that picture there. We'll talk about, do you think they're still getting up early now? Do they get up early every day? We could ask a lot of different questions for the students to hypothesize, and then they could work in the chat, which you see over to the right, which is a real-time chatting tool, and the students could all chat, or they could chat privately, where they would pick the name of one of their classmates. I might assign them a classmate. They'd pick their name, so where it currently says to everyone, it might say to Julia, and I would say, Max, you're working with Julia, and then they would talk privately in the pair chat. So maybe I'm thinking that I'm going to do that, so I've put the PC down here. I've also put the everyone chat. Maybe what I do with the PC is have them come up with questions that they wanted to ask, and they'd work on that, noodle on it, and then they would pose the question in the everyone chat. The audio recording would be something then that I could play. There is an audio that goes along with the page, and then I could give the learners practice using the worksheets that are part of the listening task. This is the key that I've been using. You can use anything you want, but it's helped me to think about what the tools were in the program that I'm using most, which is Zoom. And one of my favorites at this time is the links for learners, which is on the lower row, second over from the left. And what's great about these links is that you can put them in the chat in your platform. So you could put them in a text, you can put them in an email, but that allows the learner to get directly to where you want them to go. You can, of course, use the little QR codes as well, but there's really no need as long as you have the link. And the link can sometimes be very helpful for learners because if you give them the QR code, they don't necessarily remember where it is they're going, and QR codes tend to look very similar, whereas links don't always. This is a lesson plan from the Oxford Picture Dictionary Teachers Resource Center. Both the OPD, the Oxford Picture Dictionary, and the Step Forward series have a teacher resource center, which I showed you a moment ago in OPD, and they have lesson plans. So I would be looking at this lesson plan because here it is, a ready-made lesson plan, and I've used it before and it works for me. But now I want to be thinking about how am I going to make it work for me in this environment? And I can look at it and analyze it and start applying the features to that. Now I know this is rather difficult to see, so let's take a look at it closer up. So you would probably just write this in. Remember when I mentioned the substitution with the worksheets? So we can email worksheets to our learners. It's a great substitution technique. We can do something else as well, but if I email the learners the worksheets, one of the special elements of both OPD and Step Forward is the multi-level material that we have in there. So we have multi-level listening and multi-level grammar, and that allows you as a teacher to differentiate even when you're in an online setting. So I could send the sheet outlined in green to my lower level and the sheet outlined in pink to my mid-level and the sheet outlined in blue to my higher level. And let's take a look at what that really means. So I'm screen sharing the audio, and the learners have, the beginning level learner has a choice between 7 and 7:30, 7:30 and 8:30. So they don't have to write anything. They just have to underline or highlight the answer. In the mid-level, they're writing the times. So they are not responsible for producing the activity or the daily routine, but they are being asked to listen for the time associated with that routine. And then the higher level learner is writing the routine that he or she hears. And obviously with the times, that learner is getting a chance to predict what routine or what activity might be named based on the time they see. To augment this, to enhance it, I could give learners a link to a worksheet that's on the Google Drive, and they could work together as a group. They could do their own listening first and then together decide what the answers are. So I can open up a Google folder and insert the worksheets that I've downloaded from the Teacher Resource Center, and I can also insert the listening MP3 file. Then I go to the Google sheet that I created, and it's essentially the same sheet that's on the Teacher Resource Center. It's just now loaded up into Google, and I add the link to the listening so that learners are able to click on the link. You saw all the things I did there fly up in it for a moment, and you can see that I have the audio here, and learners can play it and listen.
Pages 38 and 39.
They can stop, they can replay. Also, as you can see, I have a comment here, and I've been able to suggest to Jose that number 2 might not be 8:30, as he has highlighted and suggested, but it might in fact be 7:30. So we're going to both listen again. Would be for the learners to collaborate in those breakout rooms that I mentioned to do a dictacomp. And that's actually a composition that's dictated. So in this case, it's not really a composition. It's whatever the audio text is. And they listen to that. Now, they've already listened for gist and detail, but now they're listening again to try to replicate it. So at this point, they're working together and they're collaborating. They're able to see and hear each other as they're working, and they can all work on a Google Doc, or they can work independently to get the accurate version of what they're hearing. And then once they have the best version that they can get, they use that as the model for them to create their own recording. And that's very important because it's not yet out. It's not yet a redefinition. It's a modification of the task, but they're still working with the constraints of the original text. So they're working on addition. Oh God, let's try that again. That's just terrible. Now, augmentation is an enhancement of the task, and certainly using Google, using a Google Doc, Google Slides, this is all enhancing learners' experience. In this case, we can link to the listening, so we can put the MP3 file that we get from the Teacher Resource Center, we'll put that on a Google Drive folder, in a Google Drive folder, and then we can put the worksheets in the Google Drive folder. We can link from the audio to the worksheet, so the learners are able to click and hear the audio right off of their worksheet. And then they can comment using that little comment. They can click on the comment box next to the share that you see on the right, and they can comment on each other's answers and then check their answers again by listening. So it's the same task, but now we've enhanced it by adding access to the audio. The learners have their own access, and collaboration using the Google Doc. There are lots of opportunities for augmentation with the materials that are in the Teacher Resource Center, both for the OPD and for Step Forward. You're able to upload the elements that are in the Step Forward and OPD Teacher Resource Center, and then give students a link to where those files are located. Now we've talked about substitution, we've talked about augmentation. Let's take a moment and think about modification. So modification of a task is really changing it up a little bit. You're still going for listening strategies. You're going to base the task on the work learners have already done, on gist and detail. But now you're going for really, really careful listening so that learners can recreate what it is they heard. And in this case, that's called a dictocomp. In this case, the learners go into a breakout room. They listen to the audio. They may have access to the pages from the dictionary to support them, and they listen to the recording and they try to replicate it. Then once they have worked hard together, collaborating on the drive to replicate it, then they write a new version. It's still the same constraints of the organization of the text, but they're adding their creativity and possibly making the conversation or whatever the oral text is more relevant to them. Redefinition, if you remember, is when we hand off the task to the learners. So in this case, we could ask the learners to record their own listening scripts. We could ask them to include at least 5 details, and they could give some hints so that they might repeat something in the course of their recording their script. But we want them to record their own listening scripts, their product, and it would be based on their daily routines, and they could use the voice recording app on their phone. They could then upload this, and we could use it as listening text for other activities. We can also use this kind of a project for oral histories. There's a lot that can be done with these voice memos, but in this case, we're keeping within the theme of daily routines and the text. Let's take another break, take a look at the questions, put your recording on pause, and when you're ready, come on back. So I've certainly talked about tools, routines, and tasks that transfer, but I wanted to put several of them up here for you to see and to have you think about how that transference would happen. It's pretty clear that we've talked about breakout rooms for teamwork, and the internet provides us with a lot of support with research. We would have to, of course, scaffold the research. The reports could be oral, they could be written. We want roles so that learners, when they're working in their teams, have assigned roles so that the teamwork goes smoothly. They can self-assign, of course. We've talked about the importance of scaffolding. Scaffolding also works with language stems that you see there and language frames. We want to break tasks down, especially at the beginning. So having learners work step by step and checking in, doing formative assessment to verify that they're on the right track, giving learners checklists, again, a Google Doc, and having them follow through the task as they go. They're taking notes on things, working with rich informational texts. Maybe you're lecturing about the current situation. We put the note-taking graphic organizer on the Google Drive, and learners can work with that. In terms of role play, we can use that grid view, just like I mentioned that they could act out daily routines for their classmates. We can have them prepare their role play in their breakout group, and then they can come to the main room, quote unquote, and they can perform their role play with the whole class watching. Don't forget your visual strategy questions, your visual thinking strategy questions. Picturing this really does mean making it clear visually for our learners, but it also means being aware that access to information is so much easier for so many learners with visual support. And when we show a picture, we can ask a series of questions. The first question being the one that is completely open-ended. How does the picture make you feel? How does the photo make you feel? Then after that, we ask what learners see. This is a great whiteboard brainstorming opportunity. Then after that, we ask what's going on in this picture and how do you know? And then we can ask prediction questions. What do you think will happen next? Who do you think was taking the picture? We can extend our questioning to extend learners' thinking. But again, all that can be done in a screen share. We have textbooks. Textbooks are wonderful tools. Learners may not have brought their textbooks home, but hopefully you have the textbook, and the textbook gives you lots of ideas for tasks that you can transfer over. So even if you don't have the lesson plan, I happen to think that Step Forward does a very good job of being transparent with its lesson plan right from the page. So I could look at this and I see that the first part of this activity, now we're into health, the first part of this activity in learning vocabulary is for learners to collaborate, to brainstorm ways of staying healthy, and ask and answer the question, is it easy to stay healthy, and state their reasons. So you see that I've got us working in a share screen mode, and I've also got us working with the chat. So everyone is chatting back and forth. In the chart, I've got it where people are going into a breakout room with the chart with their partner. Zoom is capable of having 50 breakout rooms, which means that you could have 100 students in 50 pairs. I don't think that's going to happen, but you could if you wanted to. As you look through the lesson, you can see that there are some parts that would be done in private chat or pair chat. There are some parts that would be done on the whiteboard. E is a listening activity. So I can do most of this from the page, or I can reproduce parts of the page onto a Google Doc. And I'm going to show you why I did that with this page. So in this page, on this page, the top part is really about learning more vocabulary, and I can do it very similarly to the way I did it on the first part of the lesson. But the second part of the lesson is research. So from C and D on, the students are doing research and reporting back on their research. So let me show you how I transferred that to a Google Doc. So I took the task from that page, I added roles to the page and duties. Once I've done this, it's a copy and paste. Of course, there might be some tasks that would need the duties to be tweaked, but once I've thought this through, it just goes up on the task sheet. Now, this is also great because it's a routine that learners get behind. So even though you have to invest some time in thinking about it initially, it pays off immensely as you move forward because it becomes routine. And yet it's still quite rigorous. So all I did was copy the questions that were on C and D here on the screen. I copied them over to a Google Doc, and it took no time whatsoever. I didn't have to think of the questions. I didn't have to think of the task because smarter minds than I were at work on it. But if I wanted to, I could adjust it and make it more appropriate for my community of learners. And that's a big benefit, I think, when you can use the textbook, not worry about sequence, not worry about using every part of it, but use the textbook as the tool to help you teach the learners, not the book. So in this case, I put down the research task. I put down how I gave them the scaffolds about how they would respond on their report. But then I added, and I should probably put an E here, I added, how did your team do? And I gave them 2 areas to comment on, strengths and areas to improve. If this were a lower level, I would probably have provided a checklist. Before I end, I want to make sure that you know that there are also videos that are part of the Online Teacher Resource Center for OPD. In this case, I would be playing this as a screen share, but then I could also upload or send the video file to my learners to use in a breakout group. And then I could also email it to them. So it's possible for me to follow up with videos. There are videos for every unit of OPD. And this is the health one, and it would follow very nicely on the lesson I just did with my intermediate level learners on locating information, medical information. As promised, I want to at least pay homage to the importance of engaging learners' voice and choice in our online task design. We can make use of learners' cell phones to have them produce. They can produce videos. They can produce Google slide decks. Beginning level learners can use images and create collages on a single slide. We can have learners collect big data from the net and make inferences from them, all with some scaffolding, of course. In the center of the screen, you see a word cloud, and this is a wonderful opportunity for learners to look up a topic that interests them. They don't need to be able to read the entire article, but they can take maybe the first and last paragraph of the article, copy and paste it into the word cloud format. It's a window, actually. And then from that, the word cloud is generated, and learners can see what the most important words are, what the most frequently used words are in that article for that topic. So you probably can guess by looking at this that the article I used was about disinfecting homes, and bleach comes up really high in that. So let me ask you, what research, reports, products, problems, and projects would engage your learners at this time? And don't forget formative assessment. You can use the fist to 5 with everybody when you have them on visual. You can have them rank 1 through 5 in a chat. Use your polling tools. All platforms have them. You can use the good old answer cards if you are able to see your learners. And I like to do exit tickets in a chat or in a text. And that way I maintain a certain amount of contact outside the platform. I want to thank you for taking the time to think about this. There'll be links to materials and slides available soon. And I thank you for your time and wish you well. Now, the thing about the Google Drive is that it's possible to comment. You can see the commenting. I don't know if that I can point that out. You can see the comment box right next to the share on the right, and learners can click on that comment box and click on some aspect of the paper and write, I agree, I disagree, I hear 8, I hear 8:30, and that way the group gets to decide what it is they heard. They can then listen again, because the audio is an MP3 file that you can load into Google for the learners to listen. So they would just have a link to the Google page that had the audio, or it could be loaded in a link on a breakout room. Again, all of these things can be placed very easily into Google Drive or on another site on your platform site. And when you give learners a breakout room, meaning that you're grouping them in different areas in the platform so they can work together as a team, then you give them links in their chat, and they can link